next talk is going to be by Qian Zhang. She is my co-chair at this workshop. She is a postdoctoral fellow at ND Rio and the School of Computer Science at University of Waterloo, where she worked with CLEAR as a postdoctoral fellow in software curation. Qian works in establishing frameworks and a set of best practices for curation data and software code that requires preservation over time. So yeah, okay, great. The slides are visible and everything looks great. You can kick off. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Anna, for the introduction. So good afternoon, everyone. My talk today is about the HPC-driven computational reproducibility with a case study, specifically in the astrophysics. So first of all, I will discuss the importance and definition of HPC-driven computational reproducibility in our use case study context, followed by the reproducibility demo. Then I will share some challenges and opportunities and outlook, etc. So the computational research, also known as the scientific computing, is associated with using the advanced research computing capabilities to understand and solve the complex problems in the science. Computational research could span multiple disciplines, but at its core, it involves the development and implementation of the mathematical models and numerical simulations. My 2020 ECIR paper focused on the replicability of the information retrieval reproducibility experiments, was actually trying to investigate a concrete study of the 7 open source reproducible information retrieval systems. Eventually, this results in the, end up with a conclusion that the reproducibility in the computational science as a process and not just a point-in-time achievement. So we know that the main purpose of the reproducibility is to verify the scientific method and root out errors to ensure the quality science. So it is especially important, and it's also especially important in the modern computational science. The computational the concept of the computational reproducibility also help us to frame the agenda for the digital curation by open access, open data, open code, and even the open documentation. So the long-term and also the long-term studies, usually take years. So any particular simulation may not seem important today, but the later analysis may prove to demonstrate its value in the older simulation runs. So in this way, the scientific communication and access are also augmented at an internet scale. So in this specific study, the HPC-driven computational reproducibility has a loose definition, which is to obtain consistent qualitative scientific outputs rather than exact results by using the author's original artifacts. So this reproducibility experiment is conducted by a different team with the same experimental setup, including the same input data, same numerical model and research software, following the same computational method and steps, but using different computational environment. Due to the differences in the compilers and hardware, the source code also needs to be modified so that it can be complied and run on a new cluster. Another major difference for this reproducibility experiment is the post-analysis was coded in the Python rather than that was created 6 years ago with a blend of C++, AWK, the Bash, and GNU-plot. So in this study, we try to reproduce a 2015 paper using the Illinois GRMHD and Einstein Toolkit. So the Einstein Toolkit is a community-driven software platform for, with core computational tools to advance and support the research in astrophysics and gravitational physics. This simulation makes use of the HPC high performance computing resources that are available through the XSEED program. The two computational clusters from XSEED ecosystems are STEMP2 and COMET. Both clusters provide a scratch space file system for the temporary and large-sized simulation data that could be produced by the Einstein Toolkit. This is a demo conducted on the STEMP2 cluster. So the computational reproducibility workflow is like this. First, we download the source code, including the 2015 version of Illinois GRMHT code and the latest Einstein Toolkit source software package. This Einstein Toolkit has been tested on many different large-scale production resources. And also it can be compiled and run on any laptop, workstation, cluster, and supercomputers with the standard HPC software installed. The second step is to compile and build the Einstein Toolkit using the simulation factory. We also call it Sim Factory. This step actually included two sub-steps. The first one is to configure the Sim Factory for the specific cluster or machine we are running on. Because the Einstein Toolkit depends on various libraries and needs to interact with the machine-specific Qian system and MPI implementations. So it needs to be configured for a specific given machine. For this, it uses Sim Factory. Generally, configuring the Sim Factory means providing an option list for specifying the library locations and build options, as well as a submit script and a run script. After this step is completed, we will also need to edit some of the machine's default settings. The sub-step 2 is about building the Einstein Toolkit itself. So after the Sim Factory has been successfully set up on the machine, we are able to build the Einstein Toolkit. Even in parallel, this step may take a while as it compiles all the thorns specified in the Einstein Toolkit thorn list. We could also see from this demo that it shows a few, iterative steps of building and rebuild when we ran into some errors. For example, like the option like OpenMP is not supported, or some errors talking about in specific source code file. So that's when we need to edit, make the modification to the option list and rebuild, or modify the source code itself to make it work specifically for this the cluster. And this could take a while. Let me see if I'm able to. So, but we could, keep running, debugging all these different issues until, I think it was successfully built, I think, at this point. So now here comes to the third step of this computational workflow, is to execute the simulation. This command line, create a simulation and submit it to the Qian system, to run in the background, asking for a maximum runtime of 20 hours in this specific simulation run. So if you run on your laptop, the simulation will start immediately. But for running on cluster, the Qian system will wait until a sufficient number of nodes are available to start this specific simulation run. Once the simulation job is submitted, we can also check the job status from time to time. So this is the last step of the post-analysis and visualization. So for this post-analysis, we plot the output data using a Python script. And the plot showed that the reproducibility result is consistent with the figure in the paper, indicating the success of this reproducibility experiment. Here demonstrates the primary data outputs produced by this post-simulation analysis. For comparison, we put the original paper data and the reproducibility data in one figure. So the left-hand side shows the central maximum density of the TOV star at the 3 separate resolutions. And the right-hand side shows, the second order norm of, the constraint parameter there. So both figures show it gives us a good agreement and alignment between the reproducibility results and the original paper results, verifying the scientific results in the original paper. Some observations and lessons. So first of all, we realize even running on the same cluster, it is impossible for us to expect it will work without any issues at any time. Although the authors try to, already provide the link to numerical model source code in the paper, as a footnote, the UI was not valid anymore, probably because the code author or this paper author, transferred to another department or another, institution at sometimes. And there was also a lack of, the parameter file, and also no access to the post-processing analysis script in the original paper. None of these were mentioned anywhere in the paper until we reached out to the original author, who was willing to share those information with us and also supported, this reproducibility experiment. And also the biggest obstacles, was lack of the cluster-specific documentation, which led to the fact that the model source code cannot be compiled successfully in the first place. Mainly due to the, sometimes, this unstoppable upgrades on the clusters, the salient details of the, the environment, including the hardware, the system software stacks, the libraries, the compilers information that would be, that was, being utilized for, the compilation. Also, compiling Einstein Toolkit using a cluster supported by SimFactory is the key, as it provides, the abstraction layers to be supported across cluster that has been, supported for some of the clusters, at Exceed or some, commonly used clusters. Then we still run into different issues like the building issues, the execution complications, as well as the submitting, issues when we submit the job itself. So, we try to, for example, we try to, run this simulation, on the standalone laptops, and then it turns out that we have to, that local laptop has to be a clean slate so that there will be no, version conflict for the libraries or the software that is being used by the Einstein Toolkit to make it compile properly. Or if we are going to run it on the compile and build it on the different clusters, even we mentioned that we use 2 clusters, STEMP2 and Comet. There are still the key differences, on both the software and hardware, aspects for when we do this compilation and the execution. And so we decided to the next step of this, as a result of this computational reproducibility experiment is to develop a generic setup, checklist to review the configuration on on a new machine or platform or clusters. For example, if people want to compile and use the Einstein Toolkit, the source code on the Canada Federation's host sites, or they want to use this on some other clusters across Exceed, what kind of information or checklist we need to remind the users, try to avoid those, the caveats that we have encountered with. Those information include, for example, the machine definition, the option list, including the compilers, the linking flags, the optimization and profiling OpenMP, the warnings, and even the external libraries, all these different, details. And also the submission script and the run script, all this documentation and the checklist, on these to check on these things. Eventually, because this work is also working, is a collaboration between the maintainers of the Einstein Toolkit. So when we, deal with all these different bugging issues, we think that, it's highly recommended, with this systematic approach by sending a list of files when the users is trying to communicate with the maintainers or developers of these large-scale community-driven numerical models. Those list of files could include, the error messages, and also the log files, and also the make file. That a full list of these will enable the debugging process more efficiently within less time consuming. There are challenges for the HPC-driven computational reproducibility and reuse. For example, how accessible is this particular version of the simulation model or code? How often does the code version change? The ease of the software installation, setup, etc., and the embargo periods for the new model development. All those information are difficult to acquire, predict, or manage. Sometimes the model is shared or even available, but the specific changes were implemented that make it unique. That for that information we have no track at all. And of course, the best case scenario is for us to have a validated version of a highly accessible model to use, and also easy to install and run across many different environments and platforms. But this is the ideal scenario. In addition, how specialized the needed platform is, especially when we talk about the hardware, the compiler's source code themselves, and how requires which requires the resources that are more difficult to get access to. And also this also includes the different scale of the power of computation, like the specific high performance computing, or the server, or the local laptop itself. And also sometimes the model will even require a special hardware resources to run on. As to where and how to run this numerical simulation or large scale simulation, there are no standardized environment available for for this specific source code to run on. And also we know that there are no two clusters exactly the same. They always have differences, subtle differences even though. And also the computational efficiencies also vary between the cloud computing and local laptops and servers sometimes. Yeah, and also the model reusability is related to the ease of the software installation, the setup. Yeah, and the greater difficulty also comes from the continual evolution of the underlying system and dependency software. Reproducibility requires a lot of the person's time. And first of all, there is no incentive for the code or data producers to document. Like such incentive includes like the funding, the recognition, or even the metrics when they do this. And also a significant time and expertise are required to replicate the simulation. And there, I think according to Titus, the talk, there is a general lack of common research software engineering training among the scientists and the researchers, especially domain scientists, as we heard that the programming is not equal to the software engineering. It's totally two different things. And sometimes that's why sometimes it's very highly for us to directly contact the original data and code producers for all these detailed information. That all takes a lot of time. And for the simulation data inputs, how much effort is it to get and manage all those inputs used by the simulation? Sometimes those information is difficult to acquire and manage. On the other hand, how easy is it to use the outputs outside the original context? Does it adhere to the community standards? The metadata is sufficient for someone to understand the output. Sometimes the simulation outputs are even provided in a proprietary format, and the obscure or undefined standards make the usability even more difficult. So some opportunities for us is that, still the difficulties is that the conformance to the open or standards is also the ability to the common software to read the data in the future. On the one hand, the community accepted standards compliance may assume the long-term stability in the standards. So better adherence makes more data more useful. In contrast, the lack of conformance makes data far less useful and less reason to save. And the archival accessibility is related to the how easy it is to access the data for the long term. The longevity of the technology, I think also Bertram mentioned that in his talk, is about like the technology, what kind of data formats and programming languages, if they are not well used, the technology is at the risk of becoming obsolete very soon. The computational cost of completing the numerical simulations is another important consideration if the high computational cost can only be produced with specialized platforms or clusters. The storage cost as well, it could be inexpensive to save the complete model output when that happens, but sometimes extensive storage can put a cap on how much data can be saved. So one potential solution to the storage is to store the checkpoint data and rerun it from the checkpoint data plus the input data. That will also one way of the save the storage. Some opportunities for the HPC-driven research reproducibility and reuse. So a key factor supporting this HPC reproducibility and reuse is access to the research data, the software and code to accelerate the results while ensuring the transparency and reproducibility of the research results. So that's why we need to explore how to provide an effective communication of research outputs and advanced research computing, and how might the communication evolve to accelerate public access, while advancing the quality of the scientific research. When we talk about like the promote the enhanced access to the research outputs and resources, this also include the policies and strategies promoting open access to the research outputs. The network and collaborative initiatives try to aim to, for example, to facilitate open access and open science. The development of software, the repositories and archives and reproducibility platforms also actively support the reproducibility and reuse. It's important to recognize the role of the research software inside the research life cycle. And the recognition of it, as a reproducible product is important. And also the funding for it, specifically for the ongoing maintenance of the software initially developed with, with the federal funding. So we need some mechanism to evaluate software and code to promote publication, sustainability, and reuse, and also the skill sets to fund those skill sets, for those who develop them. And software citation also needs to become a standard practice to ensure the publications give credit to the contributors and that the software can be, accessed and reviewed as part of the, the primary research products. Bertram has mentioned a few like these, developing the standards for the reproducibility, different badges. And also, we have from previous talks, we have seen different, tools and platforms that support the computational science, like the Hotel project, the UNC Cororo, the CERN's Rihanna, and the open data portal, all these things. So I think it's very good thing to have all these different infrastructure to be developed for the different purpose of focusing the different aspects of research reproducibility. But also I'd like to emphasize the supporting the research software engineering development of the core data and code reuse expertise is important as a way to support, inclusive data and software skills and, all these training programs. So, and To outlook, obtaining the research productivity and efficiency benefits will, become possible when extensive reuse of software and data becomes the norm. The researcher competitive in the science field can be redefined and enhanced, not just by the traditional metrics, but also by other factors such as the level of, the research reliability, the reuse and access to the software and code, etc. And achievement of this will require significant cultural change supported by enabling the funder, the publisher policies and processes, and a community of practice. In summary, reproducibility is a process rather than an achievement. The greater clarity and guidance regarding the dissemination of computational claims are needed. This will include documentation, on the data, code, and workflows, providing the test cases and instructions on building and running specific, numerical model and software code, and also provide the input model, the model inputs and parameters along the, along with the software engines and analysis and visualization code as well. Version control is also another, key element to provide the precise code that is used to generate the published results. So, this reproducibility work cannot have been completed without the help and support from the paper author, Zachariah Qian, who is an associate professor and computational astrophysicist specializing in the numerical relativity at West Virginia University. The other two collaborators are Roland Haas and Yufeng Luo, who are senior research programmer and research assistant at UFI in CSA and Department of Astronomy, respectively. In addition, many thanks to the NSF grant, Clear Macro Grant, and Sloan Foundation for the support of this research and this webinar. That is the end of my talk. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. Are there any questions? Okay, so there are no any questions yet. So maybe I have just one question. So yeah, of course, this is really interesting and really relevant, and especially because like supercomputers are kind of like just up there, like a pinnacle of how hard it is to reproduce things actually, and just the fact that all the supercomputers are so different from each other. So maybe my question is like, when you were reproducing these results, did you use the original dependencies that the original authors used, or you used kind of like the updated dependencies from like the most recent library versions? So maybe, okay, that's like my first question, and then I have another question. But yeah, we are already over time, so yeah, it is maybe we should keep it short. My other question is, how long did it take to like redo to actually get something that works?
Well, okay, thank you for the questions. So we use, because this is a, we would say that, that's why we give the definition in this specific reproducibility, whatever we call it, replicability or the repeatability or execution. We give this, context, what we are using, from what we get from the original, the source code, from the authors, the input data, the code itself, and dependencies of these things. So because this, for one single use case, it will be, it will have these subtle differences from case to case. So for this one, we did use the original source code from the author, and all the dependencies is based on the the standard HPC platforms, what they are providing. Yeah, and the Einstein Toolkit, that's why we use the Sim Factory, which provides a long list of components that is required to build and compile the Einstein Toolkit itself on specific cluster. And your second question is?
Okay, just one. So then the Einstein Toolkit, you used it like the most recent version, or the exact version that they used?
they didn't, at the time they didn't use the Einstein toolkit. So at that time, the Illinois GRMHD code is one module of the Einstein toolkit. So the whole point of that paper is to, to test the, Illinois GRMHD code if it's, achieve the expected performance of that simulation. That's why we need to integrate that into the Einstein toolkit. Yeah.
Okay, and so the second question was, how long did it take to get something that works?
Okay, so this is some difficulties for the reproducibility, because sometimes when we talk the reproducibility, we thought it's about execution, but here the actual efforts or difficulties or challenges, lies into this compilation and building of this source code to make it executable. So we used to, if the simple code or simple script, we just submit, we can set up the environment and just send the input data and make it run. But this one, we need to make it executable. Then we could make it to make the source code or this, the numerical model is reusable. And then we could adjust our input data for, to tune for different simulation purposes. But the key point for this reproducibility is about the compilation and the building part of the source code to be, to generate this executable. So it took at least, I think, a couple of weeks, to figure out and also to debug. And the demo just showed is also we replicated this, the demo a few days ago, just trying to make sure that the cluster we are compile and build the Einstein toolkit on exactly the same cluster and still run into different issues, even though we, made some documentations on these dependencies and all these compilers differences. And also one of the reasons behind that is that the cluster itself is, keep evolving and upgrading all these different dependencies and compilers, different versions from time to time. And we may not even notice that until the compilation, of the code, it didn't work at all. Yeah, so we have to debug. That's also one of the reasons that we haven't, or we are not able to make this reproducibility, encapsulate within a virtualization or containerization, instance like Docker or Singularity, because it's so machine specific, or a lot of dependencies on the hardware or software itself, and we cannot get access to it and solve this problem until we run into those issues. So that's another complication for this numerical model. Yeah, and we do appreciate that we have a large community of users on the Einstein toolkit, and we have a relatively fixed group of maintainers and developers who are actively, improving, the Einstein toolkit, the source code. But they have, I think the problem sometimes with the reproducibility is that we also promote reuse. So if we are promoting the reuse, that means we try to take some software that has been developed, and we don't know the history of that software, like how many people, how many versions, and what specific changes they have made, updates on this specific software. Then we take it here. We try to build on the existing software. And so we have no history on this software, and we try to build research on this and writing new codes on this. So that's why most of the time we run into a lot of issues. So, this, and as the reusers, I will not have the mindset to think that, okay, I read some documentation for this code or for this research, then do I need to worry about if it's going to work on other platforms? Like if people change the clusters, people are changing the platforms to run it. I will not have the mindset to do that. So I will not take that into consideration when I do the when I read the documentation. That's why when the other researchers or reusers take up this code and totally run on a separate computational environment, they will run into a lot of issues, because as researchers, I will not think of that in advance.